The Galactic Council chamber was silent. Dozens of alien leaders, generals, and scientists sat around the grand circular table, their eyes locked onto the holographic projection in the center of the room. The image rotated slowly, a massive warship, unlike anything ever seen before. High Chancellor Velcor of the Salnath Empire finally broke the silence. His voice was cold, calculating. This must be a mistake. Across the table, Admiral Grelix of the Drakon fleet leaned forward. His reptilian eyes narrowed. No mistake, Chancellor. These schematics were stolen from the human research facility on Mars. A murmur spread through the council. The humans were a young race in the galactic stage. Barely 200 years into space exploration, they had proven themselves resourceful, stubborn, and unpredictable, but building a warship of this scale, impossible. Professor Yelth, a top scientist from the Korethi Dominion, shook his head. This ship defies all known engineering laws. It is too fast for its size, too armored to move efficiently, and its weapon systems, they are beyond anything we understand. Velcor stared at the data. The ship was a monstrosity, 5 kilometers long, covered in thick armor plating that seemed to have no weaknesses. Its energy output exceeded that of entire fleets. The strangest part, the core. This power source, it doesn't exist. Yelth continued, his voice rising in frustration. No known civilization has the technology to generate this much energy in such a compact system. It's a fantasy. The council room erupted into argument. Some believed it was a bluff, a human attempt at psychological warfare. Others whispered about the rumored human ability to break past their limits, the same ability that had allowed them to survive wars against superior forces. Admiral Grelix was not convinced. He tapped the side of the hologram, zooming in on the weapon systems, mass accelerators, fusion lances, gravitational disruptors. These were not human weapons. They were something else. If this is real, Grelix growled, then the balance of power is about to change forever. A new voice cut through the noise. It is real. All heads turned toward a dark corner of the room. A shadowy figure stepped forward. Agent Vec, the best spy in the Galactic Intelligence Network. He placed a small data drive onto the table. I have seen the ship with my own eyes. The room fell into dead silence. Vec continued, his voice steady. The humans call it the Leviathan. It is no prototype. It is already built, and it is already moving. Velcor clenched his fists. Where? Vec took a slow breath. Right now, it is heading toward the battlefield at Xarthus IV. A cold wave of fear passed over the council. The Galactic Union had sent a massive invasion fleet to crush the humans there. If this ship was real, if it actually worked, then the battle was already lost. Velcor's voice was barely a whisper. We need to warn them. Admiral Grelix shook his head. It's too late. In the depths of space, at the edge of a war-torn battlefield, the HSS Leviathan activated its thrusters. The most impossible warship in history was about to reveal itself to the galaxy. The battle over Xarthus IV was already raging. Hundreds of warships clashed in the darkness of space. Bright beams of plasma streaked between fleets, explosions blooming like brief fiery suns. The Galactic Union's armada vastly outnumbered the human forces. It was supposed to be an easy victory, a final strike to break humanity's resistance forever. Admiral Korak of the Salnath Empire stood on the bridge of his flagship, a behemoth called the Fury of Dominion. He watched the battle unfold with a cruel smile. They are weak, he muttered, his claws tapping against the command console. Their forces are already breaking. A Drakon officer beside him nodded. Our victory is certain. Humanity's last fleet will be nothing but wreckage soon. And then, the alarm screamed. Korak's head snapped up as red warning lights flashed across the bridge. The battle map flickered, and a new object appeared at the edge of the system. It was massive, moving at impossible speed. A nervous officer's voice rang out. Admiral, we have a new contact entering the battlefield. Korak frowned. A single ship? Ignore it. The officer hesitated. Sir, it's not just any ship. It's the human warship. A cold silence fell over the bridge. Korak turned toward the main viewport. The darkness of space shifted. Something huge moved through the void. Then, the first light caught its armored hull, and the Admiral's breath caught in his throat. It was real. The HSS Leviathan was real. The impossible warship glided onto the battlefield, dwarfing everything in its path. Its black hull gleamed under distant starlight, covered in plating so thick that it seemed to absorb the light around it. The ship had no exposed weak points, no visible weapons. It was a silent giant, an unnatural predator that had just entered the fight. Scan it, Korak ordered, his voice suddenly dry. His officers frantically worked their consoles. The results came in, but they made no sense. Sir, we can't scan it. Our sensors can't get past its hull. Korak's claws tightened. What do you mean you can't scan it? Everything has a signature. Another officer's voice shook. This thing, it barely registers on our systems. It's like a void, like something that shouldn't exist. And then it moved. The Leviathan accelerated toward the battle at a speed that shouldn't be possible for a ship of its size. Its sheer presence sent a wave of unease through the enemy fleet. Smaller ships immediately tried to adjust course, moving away from it, as if some primal instinct told them to flee. The Salnath Admiral narrowed his eyes. If they want to scare us, they'll have to try harder. Order our dreadnoughts to fire. Across the battlefield, 3 colossal Salnath dreadnoughts turned their cannons toward the Leviathan. These ships were the pride of the fleet, each one a moving fortress, carrying enough firepower to level entire planets. They all fired at once. Blinding streams of plasma and kinetic rounds shot toward the human warship. The energy beams struck first, slamming into the Leviathan's hull. For a brief moment, the ship was lost in the fiery glow of the explosions. Then, as the fire faded, the Leviathan emerged, untouched. Korak felt a chill crawl down his spine. Impossible. The ship hadn't even activated shields. It had taken a direct hit from 3 dreadnoughts and didn't have a scratch. The enemy officers on Korak's bridge stared in horror. Then the Leviathan responded. It fired, not with traditional weapons, but with something new. The front of the ship glowed with a dark blue energy, and for a split second, the fabric of space seemed to bend. Then, an invisible force ripped forward, traveling faster than any weapon ever recorded. It tore through the first dreadnought, slicing the massive ship clean in half. The second dreadnought collapsed inward, its hull crumpling like paper as if it had been hit by an invisible fist. The third ship tried to escape, but the force reached out, wrapping around it like a crushing hand. Then it imploded into nothingness. The bridge of the Fury of Dominion was dead silent. Admiral Korak felt cold sweat dripping down his forehead. What was that weapon? No one answered. No one could. A single human voice crackled over the comms. This is Admiral Rise of the Leviathan. Korak clenched his fists. A human. He forced his voice to stay steady. What do you want? Rise chuckled. We're just here to send a message. Asterisk asterisk. Korak swallowed hard. And what message is that? The human's voice was calm. Run. Then the Leviathan moved again, and the real battle began. Panic spread across the Galactic Union fleet like wildfire. The Leviathan had just destroyed 3 Salnath dreadnoughts in seconds. The impossible ship stood alone, yet it held the presence of an entire armada. Even the bravest alien captains felt their instincts screaming at them to retreat, but they couldn't. Their orders were clear. Destroy the humans, no matter the cost. Admiral Korak gritted his teeth, his claws digging into the armrest of his command chair. His mind refused to accept what had just happened. One ship, one human ship, had wiped out his best warships without even breaking formation. All ships, regroup. He barked, forcing the fear from his voice. "Do not let them intimidate you. We are the Galactic Union. We will not fall to a single vessel." The order rippled through the fleet. More than 100 ships turned their weapons toward the Leviathan. Frigates, battleships, and even more dreadnoughts locked onto the target. Their cannons burned to life. This time, they would fire everything. A storm of plasma, railgun slugs, and missile barrages erupted across the battlefield. It was the kind of firepower that had crushed planetary defenses, the kind that had wiped out civilizations. And yet, the Leviathan didn't flinch. The ship surged forward, gliding through the onslaught like a phantom. The incoming fire barely touched it. Kinetic rounds shattered against its armor, plasma bolts bent around its hull, and missiles. They simply vanished, consumed by some unseen force. The Galactic Union officers watched in horror. "Nothing is working," a Xalnath lieutenant cried. "Sir, our weapons aren't even scratching them." Korak's hands trembled. This wasn't a warship. This was a force of nature. Then the Leviathan retaliated. The massive ship didn't fire conventional weapons. It didn't need to. The space around it began to distort. Energy pulses rippled outward. A Xalnath destroyer, closest to the disturbance, convulsed violently. Its entire hull shuddered as if something was squeezing it. Then it crumpled in on itself, crushed to the size of a fighter craft in an instant. Another ship detonated without warning, breaking apart like shattered glass. A third one was ripped from space itself, vanishing into the void as if it had never existed. The Leviathan was warping reality itself. Korak's breathing became ragged. This isn't technology. It was something beyond that. Something unnatural. He turned toward his crew. "Find out what kind of energy they're using. We must understand." "Sir, we can't." Korak froze. "What do you mean?" His officer looked up, face pale. "Their ship doesn't register on our scanners. It's outside our dimension." Korak felt the weight of true fear settle on him. The Leviathan wasn't just a weapon. It was an anomaly, a ship that shouldn't exist. And then, a transmission came through. The screen flickered to life. A human stood there, calm and composed. Admiral Rise of the Leviathan. His expression was unreadable. Behind him, the void twisted and pulsed, as if the laws of physics were warping around his ship. "You have one chance," Rice said, his voice carrying across the entire Galactic Union fleet. "Leave now." Korak clenched his jaw. "You think you can frighten us, human?" Rice didn't react. "This isn't about fear. This is about survival." The admiral of the Xalnath Empire stood frozen. His fleet was collapsing. His strongest ships were vanishing. And in the center of it all, the Leviathan remained untouched. For the first time in history, the Galactic Union faced a choice it had never expected. Retreat, or be erased. The Galactic Union's emergency chamber was in chaos. Ambassadors from 100 alien species argued, shouted, and panicked as the report from the battlefield played on the massive central screen. The Leviathan, the impossible human warship, had reduced one of the Union's strongest fleets to nothing. Ships had been warped, crushed, erased from existence. It wasn't just an advanced warship. It was a nightmare given form. At the head of the table, High Chancellor Valon slammed his fist against the surface, his reptilian scales bristling with frustration. "Enough. We must act before the humans unleash this horror on us all." An insectoid ambassador from the Clickterry clicked its mandibles nervously. "Chancellor, our intelligence suggests that this warship is not like anything we've ever seen. It doesn't follow conventional physics. It is..." The alien hesitated, then whispered, "unnatural." A hush fell over the room. For centuries, the Galactic Union had ruled with technological superiority. But this wasn't just technology. This was something beyond their understanding. An elder Xalnath warlord stood, his many eyes glowing with barely restrained rage. Humans must have stolen forbidden knowledge. perhaps from an extinct race, or worse, from something even older. The room stirred in fear. Even the most powerful races in the galaxy had limits to what they could create. But humanity had built something impossible. A nervous scientist, his blue skin glistening with sweat, stepped forward. "Chancellor, our research teams analyzed the Leviathan's battle data." His hands trembled. "We don't understand it." Valon narrowed his eyes. "Explain." The scientist took a deep breath. "Our best scientists believe the ship does not simply use advanced shielding or weaponry. It seems to manipulate the very fabric of space around it." He swallowed hard. "It's not just a warship, Chancellor. It's a distortion in reality." Silence. Valon's claws dug into the armrest of his chair. "You're telling me the humans control reality?" The scientist hesitated. "We don't know if they control it, but they've bent it to their will." A cold realization swept through the council. The humans had surpassed the boundaries of known science. For years, the Galactic Union had viewed humanity as a young, reckless race, a species that had barely scratched the surface of interstellar technology. Now, those same humans had created a ship that should not exist. A feline ambassador from the Tarvek Pride Nations growled, "We must act. We must strike before the humans use this power against us." A deep, guttural laugh echoed through the chamber. All eyes turned to a shadowed corner of the room, where the Draylan ambassador, a member of the Union's oldest and most secretive race, sat watching. His glowing eyes gleamed with amusement. "Strike. Against that." He gestured lazily toward the battle footage, where the Leviathan was shattering physics itself. "Fools. You cannot fight what you do not understand." His words hung in the air like a death sentence. The Galactic Union had faced wars, rebellions, even extinction-level threats. But never this. Never a single ship that could unmake entire fleets. For the first time in its history, the Union was faced with an enemy that didn't just have superior firepower. The humans had rewritten the rules of war itself. The Galactic Union had spent centuries ruling with absolute power. They had crushed rebellions, silenced defiant worlds, and erased entire species from history. But now, for the first time, they were the ones afraid. The War Council chamber was filled with grim faces, the footage of the Leviathan's battle replayed on an enormous holoscreen over and over. Ships vanishing, weapons failing, physics bending in ways no known technology should allow. The High Chancellor's claws tapped against the cold metal table. No one spoke. The last battle had been a disaster. The humans hadn't just won. They had proven a terrifying truth. The laws of war had changed, and the Galactic Union was no longer the dominant force in the galaxy. A deep voice echoed through the chamber. "We have received a message from the humans." Every ambassador turned toward the speaker, a grim-faced officer from the intelligence division. His skin was pale, his voice shaking slightly. He pressed a button, and a hologram of a human appeared. The figure was a man, wearing a dark uniform, his eyes calm yet unyielding. He was not boasting, not threatening, just speaking. To the Galactic Union, the human began. "We know you fear what you have seen." A few council members shifted uneasily. "You should." The chamber grew colder. "You see us as reckless, primitive, undisciplined. But you made one mistake." The human's expression hardened. "You thought we were playing by your rules." The insectoid ambassador of the Click Terry clicked its mandibles in nervous agitation. "We learned long ago that power is not just in strength. It is in adaptation, in innovation, in knowing when to change the game." The holoscreen flickered, shifting to an image of the Leviathan. Even in a still image, it looked wrong, as if space itself bent around its frame. "You do not understand what we have built." The silence in the room was absolute. "And you never will." A heavy pause. Then the human's voice grew colder. "You call us dangerous." His lips curled slightly. "You have no idea." The message cut off. For a long moment, no one moved. Then the High Chancellor exhaled slowly, his voice a whisper. "What? Have we awakened?" The War Council chamber was in chaos. Fear was clear on every face. The Galactic Union had never encountered anything like this before. "This is unacceptable," an ambassador from the auxiliary species hissed. His translucent skin pulsed with shifting colors of anxiety. "A primitive race cannot be allowed to wield such power. We must act before it's too late." "Act how?" growled an officer from the Thraxis Dominion. "We've seen their warship. It breaks every rule we understand. They defied our weapons, outran our fleets, and now they mock us with that message." The High Chancellor slammed his clawed fist against the table. "Enough." The chamber fell silent. He took a slow breath, his gaze sweeping across the gathered leaders. "We cannot let fear paralyze us. If the humans have built this thing, then we will find a way to destroy it." A cold, slithering voice interrupted him. "There is one way." All eyes turned to a shadowed corner of the chamber. There, half hidden in the dim light, stood a representative of the Silent Order, the most feared intelligence faction in the galaxy. "The warship itself may be untouchable," the figure continued, "but its creators are not." A murmur of understanding spread through the room. "We strike at the minds that built it," the Silent Order agents said. "We eliminate their scientists, their engineers, their greatest minds. Without them, the humans will be crippled." For a moment, there was hesitation. Assassinating enemy leaders was one thing. Targeting their brightest minds, that was something even the Galactic Union rarely did. But then they remembered the Leviathan. The way it moved, the way it ignored their best weapons, the way it mocked the very laws of physics. And suddenly, the choice was clear. The High Chancellor's gaze hardened. "Send the order." Silent nods passed around the table. Plans were already forming. Agents would be dispatched. Humanity's greatest minds would never see it coming. Or so they thought. The assassins never stood a chance. They had expected an easy mission, silent infiltrations, swift eliminations. But the moment they set foot on human soil, the trap snapped shut. Across the galaxy, operatives vanished. Some were found locked in human prisons, confused and terrified. Others simply disappeared. And then the message came. A single transmission, broadcast across every major Galactic Union channel. A human stood on the screen, an old man in a lab coat, his sharp eyes filled with amusement. "Nice try," he said, "but you don't get to decide who lives and who dies. We do." Behind him, a massive hangar bay was visible. And inside it, row after row of Leviathan-class warships. More than a dozen, maybe more. The galaxy froze. The scientist chuckled. "You thought there was only one." Every leader in the Galactic Union felt a deep primal fear. If one of these ships had already changed the course of history, what would happen now? Then the screen flickered and the message changed. It was a simple, final warning. Your move. And with that, humanity left the galaxy to decide its own fate.